Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Frost Nixon, 2008, the final selection in our miniseries, POTUS in the Movies, Presidential Biopics, directed by Ron Howard with Michael Sheen and Frank Langella, who reprised their roles from the London and Broadway versions. The original play debuted in 2006 at London's Donmar Warehouse and made it to Broadway in April 2007. The screenplay was written by Peter Morgan, adopted from the aforementioned stage play, depicting the famous Frost Nixon TV interviews of 1977. Morgan distilled many hours of Q&A sessions into a riveting portrait of power, celebrity, and corruption. British journalist and TV personality David Frost paid Nixon $600,000 for the rights to the TV interviews, but he had trouble financing the project because of concerns that he was too lightweight to pull it off. Eventually, he was forced to finance it himself. The film was shot in various locations in Southern California, including Palos Verdes Estates, San Clemente, Yorba Linda, Huntington Beach, and the Beverly Hills Hotel in Hollywood. Frost Nixon, the film, opened to much acclaim, receiving receiving 8 award nominations, including 5 Oscar notices, but it did not perform well at the box office, earning only $127.4 million on a budget of $125 million. Although this appears to have been a small profit of $2.4 million, it proved to be a loss when considering the film's high promotional costs. On the Rotten Tomatoes website, Frost Nixon was said to be a weighty and eloquent, a cross between a boxing match and a ballet, with Oscar-worthy performances. Roger Ebert gave the film 4 stars, commenting that Langella and Sheen do not attempt to mimic their characters, but to embody them. Manohla Dargis of the New York Times said that stories of lost crowns lend themselves to drama, and Frost Nixon registers as an agreeably amusing experience, more palliative than purgative. Other critics were not so kind. Fred Schwartz, writing for the conservative National Review, said the interviews were a notorious fizzle, commenting that the film is an attempt to use history, assisted by plenty of dramatic license, to retrospectively turn a loss into a win. Elizabeth Drew, author of Richard M. Nixon, 2007, said that the audience was not informed that Nixon received 20% of the profits from the interviews, and pointed out a line of dialogue which she thought particularly deceptive. Nixon seemed to admit that he was, quote, involved with the cover-up, as you call it, quote. What he actually said was, quote, you're wanting to say that I was involved with an illegal cover-up. No, quote. Drew claimed that the audience was again not made aware of this tiny but crucial ellipsis. Plot summary. Frost Nixon is set in 1977 and is a dramatic retelling of the post-Watergate interviews between British talk show host David Frost and former President Richard M. Nixon. For 3 years after Nixon left office, he remained quiet, but in the summer of 1977 agreed to sit for a series of interviews which would change both his and Frost's lives, answering wide-ranging questions which included probes into his connection with the Watergate burglaries. The former president surprised everybody by choosing Frost as his interviewer, hoping to easily outfox his opponent and secure a place in the hearts and minds of Americans. Both men had much to gain from this undertaking. Nixon was a disgraced president who had been forced to resign and had a legacy to save. And Frost knew that these interviews could elevate his reputation on the international scene, was highly motivated to get an admission of guilt from his subject. Millions of people watched the Frost-Nixon interviews, and the viewers were treated to a battle of wits between 2 highly motivated protagonists. Fun facts about the film. Frost receives a drunken phone call from Nixon in the middle of the night, in which he seems to admit culpability for the Watergate affair. Some historians claim that call never happened, and that its depiction in this movie was a deliberate attempt at dramatic license. But it was widely known that during the Watergate affair, Nixon did make late-night phone calls that he could not remember the following morning. Langella usually enjoys joking around and playing cards during breaks from filming, but this time he thought that would compromise his character, so he remained in character as Nixon, and the cast and crew addressed him as Mr. President. Even while off camera, other cast members also stayed in character, continuing the Frost-Nixon rivalry by bickering and making fun of each other. On the last day, after he completed his last shot, Langella finally dropped his Nixonian facade and shouted, "Hello, everyone, I'm Frank." Ron Howard agreed to direct the film only if Langella and Sheen got to reprise their stage roles. Kevin Bacon, who plays Jack Brennan, said that the day Howard called him to offer him the role, he actually had tickets to the Broadway stage play. Howard said that he voted for Nixon in 1972, but later regretted it. When the play was scheduled to move from London to New York, Sheen said to David Frost, "Do you realize I'll be playing you for a year?" To which Frost replied, "So will I." Langella had to learn to play the piano for the film, particularly for the scene in which he plays a song for his family and entourage. The piano piece Langella plays is the Richard Nixon Piano Concerto No. 1, written by Nixon himself. A video of Nixon playing this piece can be found on the internet. The film shows Frost meeting Carolyn Cushing on a plane as he travels to the U.S. to conduct the interviews. In real life, they had actually been an item for at least 5 years. She was not only his girlfriend, but a journalist in her own right, and was traveling with him to cover the interviews. They broke up not long thereafter when Frost went back to London, and she remained in Los Angeles to take a job with the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner. The Frost character is always seen in business suits to emphasize that he's very conscientious and never stops working. The only exception is at the beginning when he is shown shirtless in bed. The gift of the 1973 Lincoln to Leonid Brezhnev actually took place at Camp David. Brezhnev took the wheel and drove the car recklessly around the compound. The car was sent to Moscow, became part of Brezhnev's collection, and is now in a museum in Riga, Latvia. Langella visited the Nixon Presidential Library in Yorba Linda, California, to prepare for his role. The actual interviews did not take place at Nixon's home in San Clemente, because it was near a Coast Guard station which interfered with the TV equipment. Rather, they were filmed in another house in Dana Point, California. The first interview drew an audience of 45 million people, the largest audience ever for a TV interview, a record which still stands. When Frost is on the phone discussing a syndication deal, the TV behind him shows Iron Eyes Cody crying Indy, an anti-littering public service announcement that first aired in 1971. As with Nixon, Cody did practice some deception. He was not a Native American born on a reservation, but the son of Italian immigrants born in Louisiana. In an early scene when Frost's experience is questioned, he protests to John Burt, "We've done political interviews before." Frost had actually done hard-hitting interviews with notorious British right-wingers Oswald Mosley and Enoch Powell. Nixon refers to Hawaiian cheeseburgers made of cottage cheese and pineapple, which he dislikes intensely. Ironically, cottage cheese and pineapple was the last lunch served to Nixon before he resigned. Things to look for. The infamous scene where Nixon appears to admit being part of the plot. Nixon playing his Piano Concerto No. 1 for his family and friends. Frost apparently meeting Carolyn Cushing on the plane to the U.S. for the first time. The stand-in house at Dana Point. The Lincoln automobile given to Brezhnev the anti-littering PSA on the TV as Frost conducts his phone call, Nixon's reference to the hated Hawaiian hamburgers, another infamous scene in which Frost receives a phone call from a drunken President Nixon. Now it's time to view Frost Nixon. Sit back, settle down. Please remember that it may take a few minutes for the film to roll. Enjoy.